Welcome to the Irish Occupational Therapy Podcast, hosted by me, Jen Trechek.
And me, Aileen Rutledge.
This podcast is dedicated to exploring the world of occupational therapy, sharing the latest research and techniques and providing insights into the many ways that occupational therapy can help people of all ages live more fulfilling and meaningful lives.
Whether you are a practicing occupational therapist, a student of occupational therapy, or simply curious about this fascinating field, this podcast is for you. We'll be interviewing experts in the field, sharing stories from the front lines of occupational therapy practice, and providing tips and advice for anyone looking to get the most out of their therapy.
So sit back, relax, and join us on this exciting journey into the world of occupational therapy in Ireland.
A very warm welcome to Aoife Flynn on the Irish Occupational Therapy Podcast. Welcome, Aoife.
Thanks so much, love. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Aoife. Aoife, we're going to start off today just to get things straight. What about terminology around ADHD? Can you share with us what you're comfortable with and what you advocate?
Yeah, of course. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it's a neurodevelopmental condition that affects the part of the brain that allows us to carry out loads of very important tasks and functions. So the main area or the main type of tasks that are affected are called executive functioning tasks. So our ability to carry out those organization, time management, prioritization type of skills, those are significantly impacted and affected in people with ADHD. One of the probably most important things to start off with is how badly named attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is. And it's something that's getting a lot more attention, which is brilliant. And people are beginning to question it a bit more. So obviously something, first of all, with the words disorder and deficit in them aren't great. And thankfully we're moving, more away from that type of language. But one of the big things that I've learned so much over the last few years is that ADHD isn't a deficit in attention by any means. It's an overload of attention, but a difficulty regulating it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So people with ADHD have so much attention, so much. Dr. Ed Hallowell would often describe people as ADHD as having Ferrari brains with bicycle brakes. So we're well able to go, but we're not that good at stopping or, controlling it. So
it's a really nice way of explaining it.
Isn't it? Yeah.
The terminology is really important because there's still some people are using the term ADD and getting confused over the difference. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly, I only got my diagnosis 2 years ago. And it had been heavily suspected before that. But when I was diagnosed, it was highlighted that it was potentially ADD, so attention deficit disorder. So there's 3 subtypes of ADHD. So there's kind of like primarily hyperactive, primarily inattentive, and then a mix, combined type. And I had combined type, but that language isn't being used anymore. And that's in the space of 2 years. And so ADD and ADHD were kind of 2 separate diagnoses nearly, or, 2 subtypes of the same diagnosis. But even that is changing. And so I think that the probably most important thing that I'm learning and that I would love for people to, take away from how quickly things are changing is to not beat yourself up about the terminology and the language that you use. And I know that that's a conversation that's happening across the neurodiverse world at the moment, is that what's the right thing to say and how do I word this? And I think if people are willing to learn and listen and try, then that is all that you can do. The kind of, at the preferred language is person first, so an autistic person. And person first language in the world of ADHD is an ADHDer, whereas I would call myself someone with ADHD. And I very proudly say it. Anyone who talks to me for 2 minutes will know, firstly, I'm from Kerry, and secondly, that I have ADHD. But it's just, it's just my own personal thing. And I think that it's been insanely insightful in so many ways as a therapist, to be on the diagnostic side, the assessment side of it, but also to get, I guess, to be a neurodiverse person and to start acknowledging and owning my own voice in the conversation. And I think that's why I feel quite passionate about the non-judgment part of learning. And so for parents and for practitioners, it's really easy to get bogged down and to get like worried about using the language. And the worry is that it'll stop people talking. People are afraid to say the wrong thing. And so even in that respect with the, how would I would say I'm someone with ADHD, but if someone said, oh, Aoife's an ADHDer, I wouldn't take offense at all. And I probably wouldn't even correct them, to be honest. And maybe that's my own thing. But personally, yeah, I say I have ADHD.
You mentioned there, Aoife, that you got your diagnosis a couple of years ago. So that means that you grew up as somebody with undiagnosed ADHD.
Yeah.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that experience? What was it like growing up and, feeling there was something wrong, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. So I was completely undiagnosed, and I think probably very confused, as were my parents and teachers, I'm sure, as to what in the world was going on and what was wrong, up until I was about 15. My parents are both RNID nurses, so intellectual disability nurses. My mom works in a children's network disability team down in Kerry, and she would have been in that world a lot, I think, and so would have worked with educational psychologists and maybe recognized it a little bit as time was going on. And then it was during the kind of exam years in secondary school that, I guess that's the time in our lives, isn't it? That up until then, it's frustrating, but there's no actual impact. Whereas I know for teachers and parents and students, the stress kind of comes in then, because you are assessed very formally. And if your results, I guess, aren't showing what you hope they would show or what people would expect that they would show, that's the time the questions are kind of more asked, and it gets more pressing to kind of get answers to things. And so I had an educational psychologist assessment when I was 15, and it was flagged. It was highly, highly likely that I had ADHD, but Ed Psychs can't give a formal diagnosis. And the pathway is through CAMHS. And I think at the time, because it had been flagged that I probably had it, rather than going through the whole assessment and through the CAMHS process, we said, look, we'll figure it out as we go, with the information that we now have. And so it wasn't until then, 10 years later, that I was like, okay, no, I need to get this formally assessed. But as a child, I think, a lot of the red flags would have been, and it's so different to boys and girls, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, a little later on, but girls are very good at masking it. And the hyperactivity aspect of ADHD is much more internal in girls, typically. So if you think of ADHD, usually and historically, the image that would come to mind is a young lad legging it around the place, not able to sit down, not able to focus. ADHD in girls can be very, very different. So I was the student at the back of the class, staring out the window or chatting to someone. I was doodling. I was reading under the table instead of doing what we needed to do. I was the morning of home ec, coming home being like, or going into school 10 minutes before being dropped off. Ma'am, I might actually need 7 different ingredients.
I have to tell you a very quick story on that. My daughter has ADHD, and Sunday night said, I haven't got my home ec ingredients. I need these ingredients tomorrow. So I went out Monday morning, got the ingredients that she needs, put them on the table, and said, I've got the ingredients on the table. Make sure you put them in your bag. Say that back to me. And she said, they're on the table. I'll put them in my bag. I know. And I come home after work and she's like, Mom, I forgot the ingredients. Completely get it.
Totally empathize. Yeah, you do. And yeah, that's, that is like epitome of it. Got my diagnosis, and even myself working, when I was working in the children's disability teams and working with kids with ADHD, you think it's going to be all practical, but especially working with teenagers and adults, it's the impact to self-esteem and confidence. That's where the real damage, I think, is done. And that's where a lot of my work has gone in personally, even in my own journey, has been in self-acceptance and like giving yourself that kindness, because without that understanding, it's natural and it's not the right thing, it's not fair, but it is the natural thing to be like, either yourself as the person doing it, being like, why am I like this? I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be the biggest probably impact that a late diagnosis would have. And that is where I personally would say to prioritize any bit of work that you're doing once you get a diagnosis, because once you learn that your brain is literally wired differently, it's not a matter of, it's not a self-control issue, it's not a discipline issue, it's not even a matter of wanting to do something. I will be sitting down at my desk being like, please, for the love of God, would you do something? I'm dying to do it. It's not that I don't want to do something. I just, it sometimes physically feels like you can't. And so understanding that your brain is literally wired different, the kind of compassion, the self-compassion that comes from that is huge. And so the lack of that for years, yeah, I wouldn't underestimate the impact, definitely.
And Aoife, can we bring that back then to the role of the OT? Did you have any experience of occupational therapy growing up? And did your insights into ADHD have any influence over your choice of career?
So not consciously, to be honest. So I wouldn't have had any treatment or intervention or input growing up, and even after the ed psych assessment, because I didn't have a formal diagnosis. And so I wouldn't have had any direct input from OTs. And then choosing occupational therapy as a career, I thought, was completely separate to that. And choosing it was separate, but the way that they have overlapped is just phenomenal. I can't tell, like, it's so funny. It feels like such, I don't know, like beautiful play from the universe, or whatever way you want to say it, that I am an OT and have ADHD. And not that, and I'm sure you girls can attest to this, that I can OT myself by any means, because I can't. But they're so interlinked. It's hilarious. And also, I was thinking this, I'm going to have to trademark the ADHD OT pretty soon, because there's so many of them. I am not the only one. And it's just, I think it's the type of career that does actually, attract people like an ADHDer or like someone with ADHD, because it's such a creative, energetic, fun career, and you need to be able to think outside the box, which is all someone with ADHD can do. You need to be able to, be resilient to trial and error different things. And so I think that's why OT probably connected with me so much, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I adore OT, and that's the whole reason I think I got through university. And it's such, I think as well, an amazing example of what someone can do when they're in the right environment, but also when they're given the right task and when they're in the right kind of work. Because like, I would have nearly failed my junior cert, and I had to repeat the year before leaving cert because there was a huge worry that I wasn't going to get through it. And I had to go to England to do my degree because I wasn't going to get the points to do it in Ireland, which was a huge blessing in disguise in the end, because it was much more practical in the UK. And I got a first in my degree, which
well done, Aoife. An achievement. That's brilliant.
Well, I do now, I will say, yeah, I am very proud of it, and I'm like, oh God, not that it matters by any means what anyone gets in their degree once they get through, but it just, to me, was such a brilliant example of what you actually are capable of when you're doing the right thing,
and playing to your strengths. It's like, once you know how your brain works and what your strengths are, then you can play to that.
100%. And sure, that's OT all over. It's value-based, strengths-based. What do you as a person connect with? What's important to you, and where do your strengths lie? And I read this thing, it was a quote that I'm not going to remember properly, but it was saying that the issue is, or the problem at the moment is that if a child is good at art and suffering in maths, your parents will get them grinds in maths rather than in art.
Yeah.
And I just thought, oh my God, is that not just so true? Our deficits, or where we're struggling, and think that's where we need to put our energy. And it's so easy to say, it's so difficult in the education system at the moment, and especially when I was growing up in it, it's not built to ignore our deficits and nurture our strengths. And it's not about ignoring our deficits, but it's not really built to nurture our strengths. It's about kind of being
getting everybody at the same level. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why that quote, like, if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it'll spend its whole life thinking it's stupid. That resonates with me so much, I cannot tell you, because it's so true. So yeah.
Can I ask you if you didn't get the formal diagnosis until kind of 10 years after you kind of suspected you had ADHD? What led you to decide at that point that you needed that formal piece of paper?
Yeah, so really good question, really important I think to think about for people, because I did a post about this the last day, like the pros and cons, and I was of getting a formal diagnosis, and I was thinking about it afterwards because I'm really conscious of, I think, influencing anyone's decision because it's such a personal one, and you do not by any means need a formal diagnosis. Personally, for me, I had spent 15 years not knowing what was wrong, but knowing something was wrong. 10 years knowing fairly certainly that I had ADHD, but without the formal diagnosis, continued to internalize everything I was struggling with and continued to blame myself and think, nah, whatever I thought I did in the assessment, I thought, no, that's it. I didn't have the formal diagnosis. And so I just kept convincing myself that it was something else. And what changed for me then was I was working in England at the time in a paediatric disability service, and I got a call from a service at home that I had wanted to work with since before I studied OT, offering me a job. And I thought, okay, I want to set myself up as best as possible for this. And I knew that to trial medication, I had to get a formal diagnosis. And I also knew myself well enough at that point to know that unless I had it written down in paper, and that's just a personal thing, I was going to continue to excuse it or to brush it off and blame myself. And I knew that that wasn't working. So I went through a psychiatry service in Dublin and got my assessment privately. And since then have been trialing different medications and different therapies and interventions to try and support it. But yeah, that was my motivation for it. But I think as well, I think the reason that diagnosis isn't essential, but it's such a tricky situation, it's such a tricky thing at the moment, because it's become so, I'm trying to be careful with my words now. I don't want to use popular, but it's really blown up on social media and digital media. And there's a really damaging narrative around it at the moment that it's popular. That's why I'm trying to be careful to use my words. But there's this real kind of nearly trendiness label that's been put on it. And my worry would be, and I've had so many conversations with people who are experiencing exactly this, that they think, oh, sure, everyone has it and it's everywhere at the moment. So no, I'm just looking for excuses. And that has been probably my favorite thing about having the Instagram page and that little community, is the amount of people who've reached out and the conversations that I've gotten to have. Because if you were resonating with something that much, don't let either externally or internally yourself dismiss that. And I think that my worry would be, that reading all those things, that people continue telling themselves that, no, that's not it. I'm just looking for an excuse. I'm lazy. I'm not trying hard enough. So that I think for me that, the diagnosis was important, but it's not always.
So many people kind of gaslighting themselves has been my experience with adults, kind of looking for any other reason. For some reason, they don't want to kind of acknowledge that diagnosis, or there's a sense of, I'm making it up, or I know enough about this that I know how to scan the system. And it's absolutely not the case.
Goodness, 100%. And also this, you see it and people, and it's just, it's just ignorance. It's people not understanding it, but saying, sure, everyone has it, and sure, it's so trendy to have it, but to put yourself through the emotional toll that it takes to go through an assessment and a diagnostic process, and the cost of it as well. not even emotionally, but like monetary wise, nobody would do that if they weren't really, really looking for answers and for help. It's not a casual thing, and it's not an easy process to go through. And to even try and, blow it off as like someone doing it in order to just keep up with the trend. There are so many easier trends to keep up with. So yeah.
And I hear as well a lot of people saying, "Oh, there's way more people being diagnosed, and it wasn't always there." But I think our learning is changing a lot around how it manifests, and particularly in girls, as you said, it looks very different, and we're learning more and more about the condition. So therefore, of course, we're going to recognize it better, and there is going to be an increase as awareness increases.
100%. And rather than looking at it from, a negative or dismissive perspective, looking at it as, look at all these people who have gone 10, 20, 30 years without knowing this and without the support, that have been lost in the system and have been trying to figure this out without support. And that's what it is. It's people who have, been having to try and figure this out on their own when they absolutely shouldn't have had to. And like you say, it's as we're learning more now that people are being picked up. But that's the only thing. I think that is the main message to take from the increase in diagnoses. It's that all these people have been missed for so long. And, I was late diagnosed at 25. I'm by no means the youngest, or the old, like I'm still, that was fairly young now. In the conversations that I've been having, there's people 30s, 40s, 50s being diagnosed. So yeah, exactly that.
Aoife, you're the ADHD OT. Can we shine a light on some of your strengths now, that you're in this place, you have your diagnosis and a better understanding of all your experiences to date? What are the strengths then that come with being you, and how do they marry up with being an OT?
Yes, so I love this. So I was reflecting on this the last day, which is such an important thing to do for anyone, but especially if you've ADHD and you've gone so long focusing on your weaknesses. But a couple of strengths that I have that aren't unique to me, but I would say enthusiasm that I have about something that I'm interested in. If I like something, I love it and I'm all in. And I think that that is such a strength to have in life, but also very much in OT. I have an amazing ability to hyperfocus, which is unique, I think, to ADHDers. And it means that if I sit down and get stuck into something, I can absolutely power through it. Now, it feels quite what's elusive sometimes. I wish I would love to have a bit more control over it, but I don't. I think as well, people with ADHD I have found are incredibly empathetic and personable. Like, they're real people. And that is obviously so important in OT. And I love that. I love, meeting with other people who either share the same interests as I do or different ones. And I feed a lot off that energy, which is probably why I was a pediatric OT for so long. And energy is definitely another one. And I think a really useful thing to do, and especially in ADHD, because there's so many, it's very contradictory at times, or it's very much two sides of the same coin. So I cannot function if there is not a pushing deadline. So people with ADHD have an interest-based nervous system, and people without ADHD have an importance-based nervous system. So people without ADHD will look at a task, and if it's important either to them, to someone else, or it's due at a certain time, that's enough for them to know it needs to get done. Whereas someone with ADHD have interest-based nervous systems, which means it has to be exciting, it has to be motivating, or it has to be new. And so I can't really function very well or get very much done if there's not a deadline or, a certain amount of pressure. But when the pressure is there, oh my God, I fly it. I am so well able to perform under pressure, which is a huge strength. I think people with ADHD are incredibly creative. And I said that earlier, but as OTs, we have to be able to think outside the box, or we have to be able to chuck the box out completely and just look at loads of different ways to try things and make them fun, make them meaningful. And I think as an OT and someone with ADHD, I'm quite good at that. There's so many gorgeous strengths to ADHD, and I know sometimes people call them superpowers, which is lovely. It's a lovely way, I think, to talk through it, especially with our younger clients or students or kids with ADHD, but also as adults, obviously it's really fun to think of it that way. But there's so many. But yeah, they do, it does definitely flip. Like, my ability to hyper focus is then also my inability to pull myself out of something if I need to. So 3, 4, 5 hours will pass and I haven't eaten or used the toilet, and I'll have forgotten, and I'll come out of this state and I'll be like, oh my God, what do I do first? But yeah, loads of strength.
And Aoife, as an OT working with people who are diagnosed with ADHD, any thoughts on approaches? Is it a combination of top-down approaches, those executive functioning skills, bottom-up approaches with the sensory processing, meeting in the middle? Where are your thoughts on that?
So it's definitely a mix. And I was thinking about this, and I think because ADHD is so broad, there's so many aspects to it. When you're looking at practical interventions and practical strategies to give, it's very dependent on what specific skill or area they struggle with. So I was trying to think, what could I, offer or suggest that's more all-encompassing, or where do you start? Like, what do you prioritize as a parent or a teacher or an OT or coach working with someone with ADHD? And I think that the main 3 things that I would prioritize and look at, regulation is the main one. And I know that you guys will know that, and any OTs listening will know that it has to start with regulation. So I would say first regulation, second co-regulation, and thirdly, giving yourself a break, which I know isn't a strategy, but also absolutely is. And so in terms of regulation, it's for anyone who is a bit of a nerd like me and wants to read up on it. It's Dr. Bruce Perry's neurosequential model, but understanding that you have to work with a person in the order that their brain developed in. So if we think our brainstem developed first, then our limbic system, and then our cortex, and our brainstem relates to our sensory regulation system, our sensory processing. Our limbic system relates to our emotional regulation, and then our cortex is where those executive functioning skills happen. And so if you prioritize it, you have to regulate someone first. They have to feel safe and grounded in their body before you can do anything. And then you need to be able to relate with them. So they need to feel safe in the environment and with you as either a caregiver or a coach, or whatever your role is in that situation. They have to feel emotionally some kind of a connection or safety, and then they can reason. So that top level, that cortex part of the brain won't be online unless those 2 lower levels are supported. And as someone with ADHD, and I can imagine, I know that this is a podcast, so it's probably really hard to potentially picture, especially the way that I'm describing it just verbally. So having a look at the model online is really, really helpful. But if you think of it in that order, if a child is absolutely up the walls, or if a teenager or adult is completely dysregulated, that's not the time to reason with them, and it's not fair to expect them to be able to use those, reasoning type of skills. So my first priority, I would say, for people would be regulation, and then co-regulation would be the next one. So not underestimating the importance of being regulated yourself in a situation before expecting someone else to be regulated, especially when we're working with people with ADHD, and especially when we're working with kids or young people. And so the way, I don't know if it was Peg Dawson or who, but the way that I read it be described was that we, as the adults or therapists or whatever it is, are lending our prefrontal cortex to kids. So in order to create that environment, we have to prioritize our own regulation. And I think that's so important for parents and teachers. It's that theory, isn't it, it's that thing of put your own oxygen mask on first, and prioritize your own needs and well-being. And it's so hard when you're trying to help a child, or you're trying to manage a classroom, to not feel like, well, sure, I can't put myself first, and not see it as either selfish or just not the time or whatever. But it's so important, because we are mirrors to to the situation. And so we need to, be regulated internally first of all, and then we can kind of pass that on essentially. And then the third one that I would say for literally anyone is, you are definitely doing better than you think you are. Like, give yourself a break, give yourself grace. You are trying, you are figuring this out as you go. And not just in ADHD, but especially in ADHD, it's different every day and it's tiring. Of course it is. It's absolutely exhausting sometimes, and other times it's amazing and it's the best thing in the world. But don't underestimate it, and don't put it on yourself or think that you need to try harder, either as the person with ADHD or the person trying to support the person with ADHD. I would say, give yourself a break and just try your best. That's all you can do. So those would be my three main to start.
That's fantastic. That's so helpful. For parents and partners and people who support someone with ADHD as well, really important for them to understand what's going on and to regulate themselves. Thank you for that, Aoife. In terms of your mission as the ADHD OT, you've kind of set up independently in business yourself. How's that going? What's the future looking like for you?
Yeah, it's going good. It's so exciting. It is such early doors. It's such a baby, but I'm kind of all in now, which is really exciting. It was a big leap of faith. And I loved this question when you guys sent it through, because it was really nice to just sit and actually have a think, like, what do I want to do and what do I want the future to look like? But I think just to continue advocating and educating, supporting people who are either have ADHD or living with someone with it or working with it, whatever capacity or environment it is. I think just continuing to share my experience. And I think I've seen so much over the past few weeks or months, the impact that can have, just showing up really honestly and showing what the good days look like, showing what the bad days look like. And I think the insight potential that I have as an OT has been amazing, and it feels really exciting to be able to marry the two. So just keep doing this. I think I would love to, get as far and wide as possible, with the message, and just that increase in understanding. It's been just absolutely life-changing for me. And like you were saying there, Jen, it's the first step in order to live as best as possible with anything ever in life. It's understanding it. And so if I can play any kind of a part in that in the world at the moment, then that would be amazing.
Aoife, thank you so much for being so honest today and sharing your journey. Also, thanks for being so honest on social media, and as you say, showing up every day, showing the good and the bad. It is very, very entertaining at times. I really get a good laugh and really appreciate all of the insights that you give to living with ADHD. So thank you for joining us, Aoife.
Thanks so much, Shaz. Thanks a million.
That's all for today's episode on the Irish Occupational Therapy podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it informative and engaging. If you've any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at irishotpodcast@gmail.com or connect on Instagram or Facebook.
And remember to subscribe to our podcast so that you never miss an episode. If you found this episode helpful, please leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback is important and helps us to improve the show, so please do leave it. Thank you for listening to the Irish Occupational Therapy podcast, hosted by myself, Jen Trechek.
And myself, Aileen Rutledge.
We look forward to sharing more insights and knowledge with you in future episodes. Until then, take care.